Again, this is our April 2023 WordPress Rochester meetup here in Rochester, New York, but all online with guests from all over the place. And today I'd like to welcome James LePage to our meetup. And so excited to have him here. I'm going to read just a tiny bit of his bio, which is James is a tech entrepreneur, experienced web developer with a focus on WordPress development and AI-powered tools. The founder of Isotropic, a digital agency based in New York City that specializes in building custom WordPress websites and WooCommerce shops. So in addition to that, he's also the founder of CodeWP, which I think we're going to hear a little bit more about today. And with that, I'm going to let you, I could read paragraphs about you, James, but I'm going to let you introduce the things you'd like us to know about you and introduce your topic. You have the floor. You can share your screen. Everybody else is going to mute, and I will pay attention to the chat in case there's things to interrupt and ask you questions as we go. Sound good?
Awesome. Sounds good. Good to be here. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to share. I think my goal of this presentation, I have some slides. We can also do a Q&A after the slides, and also I'll answer any questions in the chat as they come in. The goal of this session for me is to give everybody a good understanding of the most up-to-date versions of AI, how they work, and then how we can apply them in the lens of the WordPress industry. So I'll give a little bit more background about me once I jump into my slides. Let me just share my screen. Can everybody see?
Yep, you're good. You're good
awesome. To go. Okay, so I'm going to run through these slides. I think the first or second one is my intro. Okay, the first one is Matt. So Matt Mullenweg, essentially founder of WordPress, recently just posted this in the incredible post status group. And I wanted to share this because I think it's a really succinct description of what's going on in our industry specifically. And essentially what Matt's saying here is that in 2023, leveraging AI is going to be one of the most important things you can do in WordPress, but also I think in the digital industry as a whole. It's going to be around for a very long time. And it's also going to positively benefit our workflows in a really good way. So by getting in now and learning the tools and learning the methods and learning as much as you possibly can about it, I think it will put all of us in a really good situation in the coming years as AI kind of influences our industry and other industries as a whole. The last sentence here, he mentions open source and AI are the two mega trends of the next 30 years. Open source, WordPress, all of the codes out there, which means AI can really understand it and help us as creators, which I'll hope to show you a little bit later in the presentation. And AI is what we probably will see in the next 30 years. So I wanted to kind of open with that. Matt's thoughts, I believe this is posted yesterday in post status. Okay, so this is my table of contents, what I hope to cover here. Introduction, how AI works. I'm going to try to keep it high level. I have links towards more sources and information. Hopefully it's not too complicated. I'm going to try to break it down into as simple terms as I possibly can. Then we'll cover the AI landscape as a whole, then WordPress use cases, ChatGPT and CodeWP for WordPress specifically, and then the overall future, which we can kind of segue into Q&A about anything I'm mentioning here. And again, I'm watching the chat. So if they come in and if I don't see them, Michelle, you can definitely interrupt me. If I do, I'll try to answer them as they come in. Okay, so who am I? I have been a part of WordPress as a developer and freelancer for around 8 years. I got my start as a younger teenager working on just local business websites for some cash in my pocket. That grew into an agency called Isotropic, which I continued through college after graduation, my full-time gig, growing into really big websites for public companies, multi-million view blogs, huge e-commerce shops running on WooCommerce. So we've done it all and really only focused on WordPress. I never really worked on anything but WordPress. Isotropic also is a somewhat popular blog for WordPress, specifically Oxygen Builder, which is a builder that we chose to focus in for a few years. So if you ever look up Oxygen Builder, you'll probably bump into that blog. And then also recently, I'm the founder of CodeWP. I was building it kind of in stealth for my Isotropic community starting in November 2022. It kind of went mainstream. It's growing like crazy, almost too crazy. So that is the AI side of things. I studied AI at university, so it's a really interesting intersection of my theory and understanding of AI plus the industry of WordPress. And I'm also living in New York City. Specific to Rochester, I went to school in Syracuse, visited Rochester many times, really love the city. So it's cool to kind of come full circle and be presenting here. So that's me, and that is what I have been up to. So what I'm building, I think in relation to this specific talk is CodeWP. You can look at it on your computer, CodeWP.ai, and it's a AI code generation platform for WordPress creators. And I'll go into that a little bit more later, but I wanted to keep this more focused on AI itself as opposed to CodeWP as a whole. Okay, so let's talk about how AI works. This is going to be a high-level overview. I'm going to go quickly through it because I think there's more information to cover specific to WordPress, but I wanted to at least hopefully give you some background information about what this AI actually does to get you the really cool images and text and code outputs from your inputs. So how AI works. There are two core classes of AIs. One's an LLM, a large language model, and this produces text and code. And one's a LDM, a latent diffusion model, which produces images. There are a lot more out there, but these are the two core terminologies used to reference the tools that you use today, which we'll talk about in a little bit. These are both based on the same academic studies and papers. So they're both based on something called transformers. And these transformers essentially determine the significance of words and their context in a sentence. Each of these transformers then produce a specific probability that a word is going to fall after a previous word. And it strings a bunch of different pieces of information and context together to build an image or build a piece of text. So if we look at OpenAI's GPT, which is the underlying model behind ChatGPT and a lot of the popular WordPress plugins and integrations that everybody's using nowadays, it was trained on a very, very large collection of data scraped from the internet, from the common web crawl, which means it covered a lot of different topics. It covered a lot of history. It covered a lot of news. It covered a lot of WordPress code. WordPress code's open source. There's a lot of it on the web. From this, it learned the patterns and structures within that data. And then from those patterns and structures, it predicts the next word in a sequence. And it works word by word, predicting what the most probable next word is, which is why it can produce almost human-like content. It's mathematical by nature, but it's really creative, a lot of people think, from there. You can also fine-tune GPT for specific tasks. So a lot of the applications and information and tools that you see is using OpenAI's GPT with another bunch of information pushed into it. And then from that, it will produce an output. Okay, so there is a thing called an OpenAI playground where, do you guys have this booked? Okay, all right, I'm being interrupted. I will migrate really quick and I will be right back.
No worries.
Sorry about that. Let me just grab this.
It's an on-the-go presentation.
Yes, we're moving. We're going on the go. Yes, I'll head over there. Yes, thank you so much. I mean, this
to mobile.
Yeah, we're going on the move. You'll get a tour of this WeWork. Okay. No worries, no worries. Okay.
We can trim this part out before you post it on your website.
All right. Now we're back.
Back in business. All right.
This will actually probably give us better sound quality. Okay, so let me jump back to where I was. So where I was I was talking about how the actual AI works on the back end. And I think the most important takeaway from that is AI works by essentially predicting what the next word's going to be. And I think this is a good representation of how this works, where I asked, what is 42? And probably the most information on the internet related to 42 is the Hitchhiker's Guide to Everything, Life in the Universe, or whatever that book's called. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it will use all of its information and training and knowledge from that 570 gigabytes and predict from what is 42. It'll say, oh, 42 is probably the most probable thing to come from that question. And then after 42 is, and then after is, and then after an integer. And you can kind of see this, if you go to this link, you can kind of see this in real time, where if you produce something, you can click onto a specific word and it'll say, okay, after and, everything was 99% probable to be the next word. So at the core of everything, that's how this AI works. It may seem like magic, it may be producing almost human-like content, but at the end of the day, it's a very beautiful and complex mathematical equation that's essentially predicting the most probable content for the specific use case. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway of how these things work. But then when we get to ChatGPT, we go a step further and we do something where essentially we're creating a bunch of prompts and saying, I like this prompt. This is the best prompt in terms of accuracy. This is the best prompt in terms of the output, the facts, the content contained within it. And then they'll take these prompts, push it back into the general AI, and use that to essentially fine tune and tailor the specific outputs to give you the best information and content. So ChatGPT was specifically focused on the actual chat aspect. If you enter a specific question or prompt, it will respond in a conversational manner because it was trained in this specific way of, we have a prompt, this is the output that we want, let's push it back in, and then now you're going to predict in a specific way, which will output conversationally as language and text. So that's essentially the theory behind AI and ChatGPT and how it actually works. There's also an image thing. And as I mentioned before with the transformers, it all uses the same underlying principles of predicting the next best thing. And this is a representation for the images of how it does that. It chunks images down into smaller bits of images, converts them into numbers so it can understand what this image means, and then predicts the next piece of the image and predicts the next piece of the image. And this is all very complex, but I wanted to kind of go through this and cover how it worked before we get into, I think, the actual application and usage of AI as WordPress creators and digital creators. And you can kind of see on this edge here, these are all images created by AI. And it's really crazy how far we've come since that paper came out in 2017 to photorealistic images of houses and animals. And it's actually very incredible. Okay, so now that's a high level overview of how AI works. In this presentation, which will show up, I believe, in the Facebook group, there are a couple more links within those slides that you can click into and look at that playground and look at all the other information and content, which will give you more context as to what I was discussing. So for us as WordPress creators and people who aren't academics who read 400-page research papers, this is, I think, the most important part of what I want to get across. First, let's take a look at the history of AI. And you can kind of see there's a pre-2020, and 2020 was only 3 years ago. And now we're in 2023. So this industry is moving really, really fast. Pre-2020, we were using AI, but we weren't really using it as we use it nowadays. Back then, translation like DeepL, basic question and answer, spam protection, the popular WordPress plugin, I'm forgetting what it's called, but I believe it used some type of AI in that kind of vein of things. Then 2020, along came these initial models that were producing almost human-like content based off of that Transformers paper. Then in 2022, we got to longer form drafts. Jasper AI was a very popular consumer-facing product. In terms of code, we are now creating multiple lines that were longer form, more accurate. We were creating images these images didn't look great, but they were the kind of basis towards what we have now, which is almost photorealistic images. In 2023, we're getting very good. We're doing really crazy things with text. People can really not tell that this is human versus machine generated. We're creating code in PHP, but we're also creating it in languages that may not have as much information about them on the web. There's more use cases for this code. It gets more and more complex. Images, we're creating photorealistic images, which are kind of flowing around Twitter now. So if you're big on Twitter, you can kind of see a lot of these images going around. And we're also creating 3D models and video renderings and really crazy complex things that last year, me personally, I didn't think we would be doing this until years from now. In the future, it's just going to be better. It's going to be better and more complex. I think we're going to kind of grow more into videos and 3D models and stuff like that. But I think for the purpose of this conversation, text, code, and images are really the core things that I think are going to work for us in WordPress. So this is kind of the landscape of what's used and the applications of AI in 2023. So we can see text, code, and image. There's also speech, video, 3D, and other. The core things I think to take away here are in text, we can create content. We can also create answers. We can create answers based on content. So something I'm finding really interesting is WordPress plugins, which we'll discuss in a bit, creating more content that is drawing on the knowledge of a specific WordPress blog. So for me in Isotropic, I have 200 blog posts. It's understanding all of that information and knowledge, and then producing more content based on that previous information and training and understanding. In code, we're creating code, we're documenting code, making it easier for other people to understand, and really getting good at that and creating usable, understandable, accurate code that won't brick a website. And with images, we're creating images. There are a lot of applications for it, but these images can be anything from photorealistic to illustrations. I think that's kind of the core thing. And then on the bottom, you can kind of see everybody really uses the same thing or some collection of the same thing. You can train your own AI, but it costs a lot. GPT-3 costs $4.8 million to train. So a lot of people, instead of doing it themselves, which is kind of not great when it comes to open sourcing these AI models, instead of doing it yourself, you're relying on Google with Anthropic and their own products, OpenAI, which is supported by Microsoft, Facebook. A lot of the more popular open source-ish models are coming out of Facebook nowadays, and also smaller things from Salesforce and other smaller dev shops, in a sense, producing their own models. But you can kind of see OpenAI is really kind of the leader in pretty much everything here, other than image generation, which we can kind of get into. On the consumer side of things, there are a lot of AI apps being built off of these use cases and AI models. So you may or may not recognize some of these logos here. I just wanted to put them up. A lot of these don't really specifically apply to WordPress, but a lot of the use cases here do. With Jasper, I believe, is probably the most popular WordPress used product to create content, but it doesn't have a direct integration into WordPress, which we'll talk about some plugins that do in a bit. But you can kind of see there's a lot of text, a lot of video, image generation, code generation, speech synthesis, speech creation. There's a lot of different things, all relying on the same underlying technology, and fortunately or unfortunately, the same underlying AI providers. If you're interested, there are a ton of these tools, and I think a really good way to find them is a website called there's an AI for that.com. CodeWP is listed on it, which is actually how I found it, but there are also somewhat like, I want to say 2,000 other products all listed on it as well, varying from just wrappers around ChatGPT to completely specific AIs that are using their own models. So I think this is a really cool resource to kind of just get an understanding of what products are out there and what they can be used for, and also just a quick look at competitors and the pricing and stuff like that. Okay, now let's kind of jump into WordPress specifically and web design and AI. in WordPress, we're kind of seeing a growth of a lot of WordPress specific solutions. So for me, I created CodeWP, which creates code snippets using AI. And I'll talk more about how we do that in a bit. But there are also a lot of different things kind of sitting on top of the OpenAI ChatGPT API. If you search AI in WordPress, you'll see a lot of things like the AI engine, GPT chatbot, content generator, customizable, a lot of different features, and you'll see a lot of solutions like that. You'll see that WordPress.com with their product Jetpack ended up producing 2 custom blocks. I believe they're in beta to produce images and text. There's something called Classify, which will automatically create alt text for images in WordPress. Tutor LMS put a WordPress and OpenAI integration into their specific lessons and custom post types. Bertha AI is a very big and popular WordPress specific and oriented content creator. And I believe it was today that Elementor announced that they were creating or including a lot of AI tools in their builder. So you can create content directly in a page builder. And I'm sure a lot of the other page builders will follow suit soon after. So there are a lot of different products and use cases bubbling up in WordPress. And I think we're just in the beginning of this, this whole growth of the industry. You can kind of see, you can see a link below, WP front page. There's a list of AI plugins, which isn't huge right now, but it's definitely growing and it will continue to grow. I think that will probably be one of the best places to find all of the products specific to WordPress. But I wanted to kind of highlight all of these because you can see they all do different things, but they all leverage AI, and most of them leverage the OpenAI models, GPT, which again powers ChatGPT. Okay, so now let's kind of jump into some use cases that we've seen around specific to web design and WordPress. So I think the first thing is using this as a creativity device, not replacing people's creativity, but using it as a way to ideate quicker and think about different concepts and really kind of figure out what makes sense before you go and actually design and build it. So one of the I would say pioneers in terms of AI and creation, Usard, just released an auto designer. And this is something where you can kind of say, I want this, create multiple versions of a home page with the Mars weather on it. And it will create multiple versions of this in their application. So that's one platform out of many platforms that when it comes to mockups and ideation, you can create a language prompt, which is then converted into images and structure. And the underlying code is essentially HTML. So I think using AI for mockups and ideation is a very powerful and helpful thing. One of the most popular image generation platforms out there is Midjourney. And a lot of the images that I showed you on the initial discussion about how this works were created by Midjourney, and we'll take a look at a couple more in a bit. And you can kind of see this is helpful, but it's not 100% helpful. So I think it, at least to me, gives me kind of hope for the human element of creativity. You can see Midjourney, I asked it, create a very beautiful image for, say I'm building a mobile phone website. And this was my prompt that I gave this platform called Midjourney. And from that prompt, it created these 4 options in this image that you see here. And you can kind of see, oh, it's showing me color schemes. It's showing me general hero designs. But if you really take a closer look at it, it's not perfect. And it doesn't really make sense. And some of the words, actually all of the words, aren't real words. So I think using this as a kind of crutch or helper towards being creative and thinking about different concepts is really what we're going to see these image generation platforms doing. And the reason that I say that is because, as I mentioned before, it's taking a bunch of different images and kind of learning from them and then pushing out content from that. It doesn't understand images and creativity like we do. It understands it mathematically. And because it understands it mathematically, it's kind of looking for these patterns and concepts that it sees in these images. And from that, it's producing an output, which is why it shows you text with capital letters, but these letters don't make any sense and these words don't make any sense because it thinks that this is the right thing, but it doesn't know because it's an AI model. So I think a use case that we'll see is using this to help us be creative and help us think, but not completely replace the creative process, which I don't think these will really ever do. And I don't think clients and users will ever want them to replace the human creative process just because of the creativity that we really possess. So that's, I think, use case one. Somebody mentioned this in their introduction. Use case number two, placeholder content, which I think this is really good for, almost too good, and I'll explain why in a bit. But I personally the prompt up top, placeholder for Bob's Plumbing. I just want a hero title, this amount of words, a subtitle, this amount of words, and a description, this amount of words. And I'll use that and just put it into my website, my custom theme, whatever it might be. And using this for creating almost real, almost production placeholder content, I think is a really interesting use case that I'm seeing a lot of my peers and friends in web development doing as well, where showing a client a mock-up with just Latin text on it may or may not confuse them. I know for me, when I was doing a lot of websites, I used the standard placeholder Latin text, and a lot of people actually ask me, why is it Latin? We're not a Latin company. We're an English speaking company. Copywritten, but now this was produced for me in about 30 seconds, or actually probably less than 30 seconds. So I think using AI to create these placeholder content accurate and 100% correct is a really interesting use case that we can do now, and we can essentially provide clients value and help them understand here's what it might look like. With that said, I think that it becomes difficult when clients like this so much that they don't need the copywriting. And I think it's important for us, and something that I've been pushing with the projects that we work on, is copywriting is very important. And because ChatGPT produces the most statistically probable output, it may or may not be the best for the company. Copywriting to me is an art, and it's an art of explaining what a company does or explaining what a product does, and then drawing a user in to do an action. And I don't think ChatGPT has that, and I don't think that the way these AI models are created will really ever completely replace that. So this looks great, and I think it should be used with an air of caution, where we don't want it to replace the real content, but it's really cool to see this placeholder content that is a very low lift effort from us web developers and creators, and really makes the client feel special and happy. So I think placeholder content's a really interesting application of this, and ChatGPT, the free version, it works very well for this. And you can see this is my prompt. There are a bunch of different ways to do it. I find that being very direct and saying, here's what I want, here's how many words I want, works very well. Okay, so that's the text side of it, but what about images? I think images are an even more interesting way to leverage AI to use placeholder content. And these images were created by the tool Midjourney, which I mentioned earlier. I believe Midjourney is free for a very limited usage. I pay for it, so I'm not really sure if it is anymore, but when I first signed up, it was free. And I used this to create a stock photo of happy plumbers for Bob's Plumbing. And that was the prompt I used. Midjourney itself is in Discord, so you access it through Discord. It's a pretty public platform, which if there's time, I'll show you a demo of what I mean. But from this prompt, I created these images, which are very surprisingly realistic until you look very closely and see that on the left, these two guys are connected, and on the right, these two guys are connected. So I think it's great for placeholder images again, but it's not really going to replace stock photography or even custom photography. I know for me, a lot of my clients really enjoyed when we hired a photographer and had them take images of the team in their workplace. So this won't replace that, but it will replace those annoying stock images that everybody has on their templates or mockups. And I think it will make it a little bit better for the client. And this is really kind of speaking towards the photorealistic images. When you get towards cartoon images, this is very cartoonish and it looks really good, and it could be used in a real website. So I took the idea of a plumber and I said I want Mario plumbers because Mario's are plumbers, and I also wanted as a vaporwave style. And this is what I got. I got these 4 different images, and you can see that it's a lot more. It's a lot better when it comes to illustrations as opposed to when it comes to photorealistic images, and it's getting better every day. And maybe one day it will replace those stock images. But I think, again, the human touch of a photographer, of a real team, when it comes to a services website, will always outweigh any AI produced image. But I think it's getting really good, and it's something that people should be taking a look at and just experimenting with. It's kind of fun to experiment with different prompts and just seeing what you get. So this was created on Midjourney. There are a lot of different options out there. There's an open source option out there called Stability .ai, and there are just a bunch of different options when it comes to images. Okay, this is another use case of AI, and there are several tools like it. The tool that I've been looking at is called Mutiny, and this is kind of producing on-the-fly placeholder content, but also content that you can then use to A/B test specific iterations and variations, and also produce content specific to where a user is coming from. So this is called Mutiny AI. And you can see I've just plugged in my CodeWP website. This is one of the free demos. I've actually never signed up for it, just because there are a lot of tools like it. But this is, I think, one of the future applications of AI that everybody will be using in their websites. And what this does, it produces a bunch of different options, and it can produce options based on the context of where a user is coming from. So if it sees a user's coming from a Facebook ad, you can say, oh, they're coming from this specific Facebook ad. Let's produce on-the-fly content using AI for this user and make it really tailored towards them. This is a public website, but it's going to be tailored towards where this user is coming from and how they're interacting with the site. So this is a really interesting, I think, use case of AI, and something that I believe we'll see a lot more of in the industry, using AI to do A/B tests, create on-the-fly content specific to information that we've given it about a user, and really personalization in that aspect. It's really good at that already. Mutiny is a production-ready product. If you go on their website, you'll see a bunch of really big logos and brand names. So a lot of companies are already using that. I think this is something that a lot of people will use in the future. Okay, a use case that I don't think a lot of people have really thought about, something I do a lot, is color schemes. Because it produces statistically relevant information, it's really good at choosing color schemes that make sense, are accessible, and look good. So I said, I want a color scheme for a plumber's website. Give me 5 options, and also create a link for colors.co, which is a really cool color palette visualizer that I use. And it output a bunch of different schemes. And these are kind of generic schemes because, again, it kind of reverts to the mean of what the most probable scheme will be. I believe blue and orange is probably one of the most popular schemes for plumbers, but it gave me a blue and orange color scheme plus the gray and green and red and gray and all of these different schemes and the links. So I went through it and I clicked on the link, and here's the color scheme. It looks pretty good. I would probably use this on a plumber's website. So that's something that I personally use it for. I don't really know of a lot of people who have used it for that, but I think it's really good for it. So definitely something to take a look at. Okay, now let's get into code generation. This is kind of my bread and butter. When I studied AI generation in college, I kind of specialized in the generation of code using large language models. So this is why CodeWP exists. So for WordPress specifically, if we think back to the way beginning of this talk, when I showed what Matt said yesterday, I think that this is probably the most impactful thing specific to WordPress, which is code generation. And the reason being is because there's just so much open source content and information out there on the web. These models are already really good at creating code that's usable and accurate and good for WordPress creators. So a bit of background about what CodeWP is. I started CodeWP when we were building websites in our own agency. We had a ton of different code snippets for WooCommerce that we were kind of personalizing, but not really, for different projects. And I was like, why not just take all of these code snippets and train our own model about WooCommerce and these code snippets, and it will output these code snippets for me. And I can say, I want to change it to this, and it will make this change to that. And it ended up working really well. I shared it with the people over in my Isotropic community, which is a Facebook group, and they found it very interesting. So in a weekend, I took this feedback and built CodeWP from WordPress, and it actually still runs on WordPress for the front end, which is kind of an interesting tidbit. And it grew very quickly into a code generation platform specifically for WordPress. So I think the use case of using CodeWP, which has a free plan, but also ChatGPT and other platforms out there to create code for WordPress, is probably the most impactful thing for professional website creators who do this all the time and need these different code snippets and solutions. So you can kind of see we're a bit zoomed out, but on this side of things, I'm creating something specific for Elementor using a mode that we had trained for Elementor, which you won't really be able to do on ChatGPT. And I'm using on this side a prompt that says, I want a CPT for cars and a custom taxonomy for parts. And instead of me having to type all of these different labels, it makes the labels for me, which I love. So that's probably my favorite use case of creating custom post types, just because it shows where AI can really shine. So that's CodeWP and why it exists. And the reason why I kind of recommend CodeWP, and I would recommend it, I promise, even if I wasn't the creator of it, is because ChatGPT hallucinates. And this is a big thing that isn't immediately clear to users of this tool. This is a free tool. It's really accessible. It's great, but it hallucinates. And what I mean by that is, if we take a look at this prompt, I say, summarize this article. Here's a link to a New York Times article, and OpenAI gives me a response. This is the free version of the ChatGPT tool, and it will fill in the blanks. It will actually read the URL. It won't open the URL. It won't look at any of the content on it. It will just look at the slug of ChatGPT prompts to avoid content filter. And from that, it will hallucinate, and it will essentially make up information that it thinks to be the most statistically relevant. And it will say, this article discusses XYZ, even though it never read the article and it doesn't understand any of the information within it. So that's what a hallucination is, and it kind of falls in all different industries. If you're looking up very scientific facts and using ChatGPT as a search engine, you'll see a hallucination a lot. If you're using it for code that it doesn't have a very good grasp and understanding about, it might output code, but it might make up a specific function. It might do something where it isn't outputting something that's entirely truthful. And I think this is the biggest issue with large language models and ChatGPT specifically, because it's so accessible. Hallucinations are a big problem with LLMs everywhere, with any LLM, just based on the way they're created. They're essentially, and I was reading this article a little bit earlier, they're a calculator for words. They're not a search engine because they don't understand how to search. They just have this understanding of, oh, from this word, I must create another word that's the most probable word to fall after it. So this is a big issue that a lot of different things are seeking to solve. So CodeWP solves that by actually giving the models a bunch of code that is proper and is correct, and having them use that as kind of a base plate for the code that we output. In terms of ChatGPT itself, a big news article and a big release was plugins. They released plugins themselves where now it can search the web. So this is an example of where it can't search the web, but in the future, you can put this link in and say, open this link and read this article. And eventually it will do that. And by providing it this context, it will act as its calculator for words and use that context plus its statistical reasoning to create a very accurate output. But right now, with an LLM by itself, it hallucinates and it produces very credible looking but not accurate information. So with CodeWP, a big focus of ours was we don't want to create code that will break a website. And how do we do this? We fine-tune models. We use a complex algorithm to choose these different models of AI and also different providers. We use OpenAI, but we also use Cohere, and we're also incorporating our own models, which in the future will eventually be open sourced for WordPress. And we choose the best tool for the job. And we also provide it a lot of information. We provide it with a code snippet. If you're typing in, I want to create a specific post type, we will give the AI, here's a post type, here's how you do it. And we'll use that to produce its own information. And we also have a code first user interface and a free plan. But this is kind of how we're kind of combating that issue with hallucinations that you see on ChatGPT. If you're using ChatGPT to create code, I'll go back real quick. If you're using it to create code, an easy way to get around this hallucination issue is by giving it what we do, giving it an example. So if you're on Stack Overflow and you see an accepted example of a solution for, oh, I want to do XYZ when a WooCommerce subscription is processed with this specific use case, but this Stack Overflow answer is almost perfect, but it's not perfect for me. You can take that, copy and paste it in, give it the context, and it will be a lot more accurate because it has information to work with. It won't make things up as often. So I think that kind of is what we're doing at CodeWP, and also how you can prompt ChatGPT if that's your tool of choice to create accurate information. This also kind of falls on every aspect of generation. If you wanted to give you a good overview of who I am, you can copy and paste my bio into it, and it will read the bio and then kind of produce a summary of it, or something like that. So context is important. Another use case, which this is very good at, and you don't really need to provide context with, is code and error explanation. And this is really good at ChatGPT. With CodeWP, we don't really have this feature. So I use ChatGPT and CodeWP interchangeably to kind of create and check code. So you can see in the left image, I'm asking, what does this code do? And I just copied and pasted something from Stack Overflow. And this is really good at breaking it down into simple English. It says, this code retrieves the subscription IDs. It does it this way. It uses these functions, and here's how it works and what it does. For me, it's very helpful to understand code that I don't understand. I'm seeing big chunks of plugins and things on Stack Overflow and things on the WordPress forums, and sometimes I don't understand how it works. This is very good at breaking it down into easily understandable pieces of content. Something that I see a lot of people also doing is saying, what does this code do? Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, like I'm a 10-year-old, like I'm a 6th grader. And it also will kind of make it a lot more understandable for you. And I without shame, do that a lot. I am a 5-year-old according to ChatGPT. You can also see I can have it rewrite specific code. So I think it's actually taking the code that I had in the left image, and in the right image, I'm saying, I want to rewrite this as a class, an object-oriented class. And it will do this and do it very well because it's not creating new information. It's taking information and repurposing it. So it knows that this code snippet is right. I will now rewrite it to be OOP or more efficient, or do XYZ, or instead of use this meta field, use this meta field. So it's very good at these different things where it has context. You can also see I have a fatal error. I copied it from my debug log, or I copied it from the front end of my WordPress website, the terrifying white screen of death. I pasted it in here and it said, here's probably what it is. And this isn't the greatest example. There are a lot better examples where you have very long error logs and stack traces, and you can paste it in here and it will at least usually point you in the right direction. Again, hallucinations are a thing, and sometimes it says, oh, line 748 does exactly this. And you have to keep in mind that it's not right, and you have to verify these things because it will hallucinate. But explaining errors for me is very helpful, and kind of walking me through how to think about these very scary looking error logs is a helpful thing, I think, for programmers and also non-programmers alike. If you want to get a head start in support, and you've broken your site and you've reached out to support, this might point you at something that is something, oh, maybe I should disable this plugin, or maybe I should do XYZ to get back on track. In CodeWP, we're kind of trending towards the explanation and education aspect of things. I think for me, this is a very important thing because we have a lot of very incredible PHP developers that know a lot more than me about PHP, but we also have some just hobby developers who may be just getting started in PHP. And I think for me, it's important to give everybody the tools that they deserve to understand what code does, how to implement it, how to do it safely, and so on and so forth. So for CodeWP, we have initial features for explanation inline and both in a chatbot, but I also use ChatGPT without shame to explain the code that we're using on CodeWP. So let's talk about what WordPress.org thinks specifically to the code generation. They put out a statement and it's linked here, and I can put the link in the chat if anybody's interested in actually reading it. But essentially what they said is if you're creating code, it's up to you to make it GPL compatible. And in very simple terms, if you're going to create this code, make sure the AI hasn't directly copied and pasted code from some other plugin that is a complete mirror image of it, which is going against GPL. Make sure it doesn't do that. As long as it doesn't do that, there's no guideline against using generated code. And it seems that a lot of the higher ups in WordPress are actually very for the integration of AI into our ecosystem. So I think something important here is make sure it's GPL compatible. I think this kind of is more oriented towards ChatGPT. With CodeWP, we use so many different AI models and so many different technologies of stringing things together and then security checking and then rewriting and over and over and over again. It's going to be very, very difficult to get code verbatim, but I think it's important that it is checked for GPL. And for us at CodeWP, we're working on a lot of different things to, if it does include sources, give you those sources. If you are using it to create a plugin, creating a specific license for that, for our specific models that we're transitioning into, creating an open source model that everybody can use. So I think when it comes to AI, if you're a creator, using AI and using it in the spirit of open source software, GPL and WordPress specifically is very important. Okay, so where are we limited in AI now? In 2023, I think the biggest issue is hallucinations. And this might be the most important takeaway from this talk. If you're using ChatGPT as a search engine, if you're using it as the end all be all single source of truth, you shouldn't. It will tell you information that is incorrect. It's getting better by the day where sometimes if it knows that this thing is going to be incorrect, it'll say, I'm an AI model, I can't answer this question. But sometimes it will create a very, very convincing answer or very convincing code function. I know when I was initially using it for WordPress or WooCommerce, it would create a lot of WooCommerce functions that just didn't exist. It looked like they existed. It followed the format, but it didn't exist. I think another issue that will probably start showing up is a dependency on AI. So with code, a lot of people are creating code and not learning PHP or learning JavaScript. So a dependency on AI is something that I personally am trying to stay away from and learning more about. I'm learning React right now, learning more about how React actually works instead of just using the code that it's giving me. For us at CodeWP, that's a big focus of us, the education aspect, in addition to everything else to kind of mitigate the dependency on AI. And then also the legal implications. I didn't really want to get too deep into the weeds, but there are legal implications specific to images, which is why I only suggest using them for placeholder images at this point. And also the GPL and WordPress specific guidance. So I think those are the three biggest limitations here. And then the future, what the future holds. For me, and I think we can kind of segue into a Q&A. For me, I am very optimistic about the future of AI and the usage to better WordPress creators, but also everybody digitally. I think that you can definitely look at it in a negative or positive light. And for me, I choose to look at it in a positive light because it's here to stay. It's going to be a part of our industry. And I think learning to use it as best as possible and learning to use it alongside us as human beings who are creative and different and better than AI in many different ways is the route we will go. I think eventually, in specific terms related to code generation, it'll probably start helping us replace the need for custom plugin development, stuff like that. But it will push us, if we're developers, towards a more consulting role of, here's how you can implement this. Let me implement this for you. A client's not going to be wanting to prompt AI and check the code and create the website. They'll understand that we're using AI to help us, but I don't ever think that we'll be replaced by AI specifically as developers. And I think for the creative people out there, we'll use it to help support our creativity and be more creative as opposed to replace it. So for me, that's my outlook on it. There are definitely different ways to look at it, but for me, I choose to take a happy approach to it. So that's the core presentation here. I think and hope that it got a lot of information across specific to WordPress. I'm happy to answer any questions. I apologize for our migration. I hope you had a beautiful tour of the WeWork, and let's open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a lot. That was a lot of information to assimilate very quickly.
Yes, I apologize.
No, it's all good. And it'll be even good to go over it later and kind of like let it sink in a little bit more. One of the things that I didn't realize until recently, and then you actually reiterated even more, was how many variables you could input to get the information out that you want. So for example, you could say, write in the style of somebody, right? So like I've had somebody say, write in the style of Brene Brown, and you get like this like feel good way of putting it and things like that. So you can actually, so it isn't always like staccato, robotic or whatever, that you can actually have it be in the style of somebody else and kind of play with it from there. And that was like mind boggling that it's that intelligent.
Yeah, and I think the analogy of ChatGPT specifically as a calculator for words is a really interesting analogy. You're putting in a lot of input and you're getting a lot of output. You're not using it as a search engine, but instead you're kind of tailoring it for your usages and requirements. So if you want it in a style, you can prompt it to be in a style. If you want to rewrite code in a specific way, you can prompt it to rewrite code in a specific way. You can also give it context. So for me, when I'm creating emails, I'll give it a bunch of my previous emails and say, here's how I write these emails. I want to answer this email and I want these bullet points to be answered. Go answer it. And it will answer it drawing on the context I've given it and the parameters I've given it. And it will create this output of something that sounds exactly like me because I've told it, here's how I operate. So I think thinking about it as a calculator, and a calculator can be very accurate if you give it the right information, as opposed to a search engine or anything else, is a really good way to think about it.
Absolutely. Let's see, what questions do we have other than Trevor giving me a hard time?
Can you stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
We have a lot of conversation, but not a lot of questions. So does anybody have questions they want to ask James?
I'll ask a question. So when I started thinking about all this, now my enterprise has 9 different outlets, news outlets. We've been around for about 2.5 years. We have an average per outlet for anywhere between like 3,000 and 5,000 individual articles that have been written, everything from politics to lifestyle, etc. The idea for me would be to basically teach it from all, input every single one of those and figure out a way to, every time a new article is written, to put it in there. And then at any given point I now have a knowledge base full of everything that's in there. So if I want another article about a name of the topic, whatever it may be, like MP, miles per gallon or cost of gas or a political movement, etc. I could then extrapolate using using GPT, being able to extrapolate information on any level that I want. How many, I don't know, I'm not explaining it well, but I think you get the idea. I want to be able to create a knowledge so that I can then go back to that and pull more information, find related articles. I want to find every other, here's a good example. I want to find every other article that we published that says Joe Biden in it somewhere. And then, be able to do that, to be able to, most simply link to other articles on that topic. Now, there are other things built in there, but other more advanced things I want to be able to do, like target certain pop-ups for subscriptions or for interest or signups or polls or quizzes that are automatically generated on the fly because of the AI. Is that fairly doable?
Yeah, and I'm surprised that it doesn't exist already for WordPress, because I think WordPress as a CMS is kind of the perfect platform to do exactly what you just said. So I'll break it down into a couple of different things. The first thing is, if you have a very large website, you can kind of do like what I said with the emails, where you can essentially train the model on the editorial style of the content. So this is called fine tuning, and you take prompt completion pairs. So for example, if I had a heading and a paragraph, and the heading kind of related to this paragraph, I would take the heading as the prompt and the completion as the big paragraph. And I take that and I essentially train the model on this information. And what that does is it teaches, as OpenAI did with their $4.6 million training run, it teaches it on your specific content. So it doesn't really give it a good understanding of dates and facts in a sense, but it does give it, this is exactly how my publication writes. So from that, you have kind of your special personal model that is, it sounds exactly like a specific writer, or it follows your editorial guidelines to a T. From that, it will produce good sounding content, but the other half of it is giving it the proper context. So when you're writing, if you want to write about gas prices, you can say write about gas prices, and it will write it in the style of your publication, but it will probably say gas prices are $4 or gas prices are $2 when it's not really. And to get around that, you can do two things. You can do one of just giving it the actual price, which is context injection. So I've seen a lot of writers using kind of these prompt models of, here's my general structure of what I want my article to be, and here are the important facts and statistics that must be included that are up to date. And you can even do this on ChatGPT. And by giving it that information and also leveraging the model trained on your thousands of articles, it will produce the accurate article that sounds exactly like your website. And I believe that we'll probably see WordPress plugins doing that in the future. A lot of these content generation plugins don't really have that personalization yet. But we'll probably see that in the future, specific to WordPress, just because of our ecosystem, and we're based on content. We're a CMS at our core. So I think that's kind of the initial thing. And then also when looking at related pieces of content, especially on these large websites, so my blog has hundreds of articles. One of our projects that we did had thousands of articles. I think using a aspect of AI called embeddings, which gets very complicated, and I think this may give just an easier representation. Using embeddings can help us understand the relationships between pieces of content. And embeddings are actually used in the output of language from these models, where I was discussing how it's essentially predicting what the most probable piece of content is. It's using an embedding, and an embedding is a mathematical representation of the meaning and context of a chunk of text, which could be a paragraph or a word or a piece of a word. But I think in your situation, if you wanted to find the most related articles that weren't just doing keyword matching, which we have with WordPress built-in search, but also things like Elasticsearch or something like that. If we really want to dive into what does this article mean, instead of it says gas prices, it's instead of that, we're looking at let's find articles that are talking about the impacts of gas prices on this specific group. We can use embeddings, and we can take all of this content, and you can see each different point is a representation of the meaning of this content. And you can kind of think of them as a blog post in itself. And the clusters of, I see a bunch of gray clusters down here and red, that's all similar content groupings. And I think that a WordPress plugin will come along that makes it easy to do this, and not really complicated, but we can kind of use AI to understand the meaning of your blog posts, as just opposed to finding the most keywords that say gasoline in them. So I think this is something that will probably come to WordPress pretty soon. It was something I was thinking about building, but I don't have the time to do that. But I think using embeddings is really what you're looking for. And then coming full circle, if you have a fine-tuned model that outputs the content just how you write it, how you've always written it for years and years and years, and then you use embeddings to find relevant information that could be current, but could also just be referring back to a previous article, and use that to kind of inform your generation of, oh, by the way, we wrote this article in 2016. We talked about gas, and we were 100% right on what was happening. Refer back to this article. You can use it to do that and give it that context and create this output. So I think a lot of this is theory, and a lot of this is very complex at surface level, but there will probably be WordPress plugins specifically to do this. And if you want to dive into it, you would look up fine tuning and embeddings. And if you take a week, you could probably figure it out and get it down par. But those are the two things that you would use in the context of a very, very large site to create content that's actually valuable towards users.
Yeah, that'd be very valuable, just so that we could, as we look at what the statistics are showing us about what people want to read, we could have articles created by AI about, write an article about gas prices in a given geographical area.
Yeah. There are websites doing this already.
And there are websites doing this already.
With a company called Bankrate, I believe, they're using AI to create these articles and being very open about it. And there's a badge that says this was written by AI. And I think kind of moving more into the SEO side of things, when nobody really knew what Google thought about this, and eventually Google realized that they were going to lose and said, as long as this gives your readers value, you can use AI generated content. So we're seeing a lot of more AI generated content being used in websites, and realistically, as long as it offers value, me as the reader, I'm fine with it, and I'm sure a lot of other people are too. So I think the actual process of creating it, you can do that with the current AI we have. In the future, it will be made a lot easier through WordPress plugins and maybe third-party services. But also Google's fine with it at this point, because I think they realized that they couldn't not be fine with it.
You don't have any choice.
Exactly.
I particularly like using it for idea generation. Like, give me 10 reasons why XYZ, that kind of thing. And the other day, somebody asked me to write a testimonial for them, but it had to be in under 280 characters so they could tweet it. And I was feeling brain dead at that particular moment. So I said, write a testimonial for, and I put the person's name in there, and ChatGPT went out and pulled information about them, wrote the testimonial, which then I rewrote because I wanted it to be my voice, but it gave me the ideas of what I should include about that person, and created a pretty nice little 280 character testimonial for them. So I wasn't feeling particularly creative that day, but I was able to use a little bit of an assist from ChatGPT to get me to where I needed to go to be able to produce that content.
So if I have staff writers, like 3 or 4 per outlet, I could train it to make it write like any one of the given writer's style.
Yeah. And you can do that. You can do that in kind of 2 ways. You can do that with the fine tuning, which would get the writer's style down perfectly, but you can also provide it context. And I think in the testimonial example, for me, if I had a essay that I wrote in college about some history thing, and it was the way I wrote my content, I could paste the history essay into ChatGPT, and then I could say, here's how I write. Don't take any of this literally. This is just my style. Find the style that I write in. And then underneath, I could say, okay, with this style, here's information about this company, CodeWP. Here's what they do. Now take this style, take this company, and maybe also here's my background. I'm a WordPress developer. I do XYZ. With these 3 pieces of information, now write the testimonial. And it will write the testimonial with the style in my writing, with the understanding of what this company is, and also with my background. And it will also take all of this and say, oh, I'm going to infer that James LePage, because he's a WordPress developer, likes CodeWP because of XYZ. And I'm also going to write it in his voice. So again, I don't want to harp on this too much, but I find it the perfect analogy. If you think about it like a really powerful calculator, you're giving it these inputs and it's getting these outputs. That's a really good way to leverage ChatGPT to create these custom things without having to fine-tune models, because fine-tuning is complicated, it costs money, and it's very, unfortunately, in my opinion, inaccessible to a lot of users at this point. I think in the next year we'll see these GUIs coming out and education and making it very easy for people to do this. But at this point, it's a little bit difficult. So you can kind of do the same thing by just giving context and saying, here's what I do, here's how I write, here's 10 examples of my previous emails to this one person. So now they know who this person is. And you can really apply that to a lot of different things. For me, with Isotropic, I used it to write popular blog posts. I said, here are all my previous blog posts. You're pretty good at finding the most statistically good sounding thing. Let's use you to create a really good sounding title. And it created a really good sounding title. And I used it for a YouTube video, and that YouTube video blew up. I don't know if it was the title or not, but it creates these, it's very good at creating these things just because of how it's created, because it's predicting the most probable information. So I say clickbait, it will create a clickbait YouTube title that you can picture in your head right now. It's very good at that.
So do the paid for models allow you to save these fine tunings?
Yes. So when I mention fine tunings, I'm talking about going directly to OpenAI and creating a fine tuning, which in itself is a relatively complex topic, but I think it can really just be broken down into, I'm teaching it additional information. It's not going to remember this information as if I learned it. If I learned about history, I would have a perfect understanding of, here's the date, I can recite it on a test. If I'm fine-tuning a model on history, it may or may not give me that date, but it will understand the general concepts of that historical period and the information that we've taught it. And then from that, we can take the fine-tuned model and then provide it with additional context of, here's the date, here's the name, here's all of that information, and get really good outputs from it. And these are paid for models that you're hitting a API endpoint to train. It's stored by OpenAI, and it costs you per token, or essentially per word price for each generation, and also each piece of content that you're training it on. It's not a lot of money, and I think I saw a mention about kind of the pricing of OpenAI in one of the chats. This is not a lot of money. It costs very little to do this, and how little I'm talking about is 0.0002 cents per 1,000 tokens, and a token is roughly 4 tokens per word. So if you do that math, it comes out to be cents. It comes out to be very, very little, a very low cost. And you can actually access these models via the API, but you can also play with them. You can't really fine tune it, but you can play with them if you want to set up billing on the playground, which was a screenshot I had in the presentation. But this playground is a GUI into your API endpoint. So if I said, write a poem, right? It will do that, and it will output just a bunch of information, and you can kind of access all of the different things that you have here. And I might be able to show you my probabilities. But this is a way if you want to kind of play around with AI in a more easy way than using Python or PHP or something, you can do that. And this is kind of what I was talking about with our probability. Something that's interesting is you have access to the same model as ChatGPT does. So if you go here, this will give you essentially what ChatGPT is doing. ChatGPT has a system prompt where it says, you're a helpful assistant. You can't talk about current events. You can't talk about any controversial issues. You can't do X, Y, Z. And then when you enter your prompt, you're entering it here. And from all of this system information, which is basically telling it what to do, and from this prompt, it's outputting information. So if I said, you are a pirate, and I say, write a poem, it will probably write me a poem in pirate speak. Let's see. And you can kind of see these are the underlying models and API endpoints that are used in ChatGPT and used by a lot of the products that I mentioned in the presentation. And we use this roughly 35% of the time in our generations. So if you do want to play with this and kind of dive into it, I would say the easiest way to do it is to go into the playground and do it here. And then you can learn more by reading the documentation and watching YouTube videos, which is how I learned how to build the things that I had built and apply the theory that I had learned.
What are we looking at here?
This is Playground for OpenAI. And you can see the link up here. I'll link it down here. I'll put it in the chat. But this Playground allows you to interact with the models that most AI products use. Most of the WordPress plugins are using a PHP composer package that plugs into the same model and does the same thing that you see here visually. So I think this is a cool way to kind of, if you want to tinker and you want to play around, you can play around here and mess with the various parameters and learn what they actually do and what they are in this platform. I don't know if it's free anymore. It used to be free. If it's not free, as I mentioned, it costs this costs under a cent for me to create. So it's very cost effective if you do want to play around.
I just logged in without having anything tied to any credit cards, so I think it must still be free.
Incredible.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this is actually I'm friends with a lot of startup founders who are in AI venture backed, and you'll go on their computer and you'll see about 100 tabs of this with different parameters and different prompts and different information. So this is really what a lot of people who are leveraging OpenAI, which are the most popular AI models around, that's what they use. And they do their own special spin. And with CodeWP, we use multiple providers and kind of mix and match and choose what's the best for the scenario. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of trial and error, and you're kind of seeing this here in the playground.
Following along the journalism path that we were on before, could you say a little bit more about, share your thoughts about attribution? What do you think that that if articles are generated completely by ChatGPT or one of the other products, that they need to be attributed to the AI engine?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I personally think that if you're creating with AI, it should be disclosed that this was at least partially helped along by AI. Just because me as the reader, I would love to know that. And even with the code, if it was created by AI, I would like to know it was created by AI, just to know, especially as they get better and better. I am a proponent of human creativity, so it's cool to read an article in 10 years that was made by a human. So I think having these kind of frameworks in place now and being able to accurately understand this was created by a human is helpful. I think that when it comes to fine tuning and kind of creating based on a author's voice, that should definitely be, you should ask the author, can I do this? Are you okay with this? Stuff like that. I think if you're using code from various sources, you should ask for permission to use that code. So for us, we have permission for all of the AI modes for the plugins. We have permission from the creators to use their code bases and snippets associated with it to create our code. So I do think that there's a lot of, and right now it's really all honor system, but I hope that there will be some type of framework here that we can all use to understand where AI is being used and how it's being used in these articles. I think Bankrate is doing a great job of saying this is created with AI. It was reviewed by this editor who is very good at what he does, XYZ. So I do think that it's going to be an interesting couple of years, and I hope that we can kind of maintain that understanding of human versus AI. There's one other point, but it is gone from my head.
To follow on to that, I'm using it for some documents I'm writing at work, and I'm using it for the general concept. Like if I ask it, what is WordPress? It gives me 3 nice paragraphs. Well, I want to use that in my document, but then the question is what's mine and what's, how do you quote it, basically? What from a legalese, how do you quote it? And I guess that's something we're just going to learn since we're on the cutting edge of this.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of comes down to everything regarding the legality and information aspect of this. There's no legal precedent at all. I spoke with Josepha Hayden from WordPress, and she said there's no legal precedent. We're kind of flying blind here until we have some type of lawsuit or anything here that kind of gives us this guidance and information. And you see that with the code, but you also see that with images and text and everything. So I think in the immediate near-term future, just saying this was created with AI, or this was helped along by AI and completely edited by a person is important. And then I also think doing what Google does and actually offering value with the content is also helpful. I know that a lot of my Isotropic articles have been spun essentially by AI, and it's basically the same thing, but reads a little bit different, but you can tell it's from my content, and that's not offering value to users. It's actually detracting from users. So I think that using AI and giving it attribution and then creating content that is helpful for people is probably the most we can really do at this point. And then hopefully in the future, we'll have specific licensing and specific regulations from the FTC and all of these different things. But again, it's moving so fast. If you look back to the market map, it started in 2020 and we're only 3 years in. So it's pretty crazy. Yes, I agree. Lawyers are going to get rich from this. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of different lawsuits and just challenges here that hopefully there should be, and hopefully everybody gets it right and creates a framework for what we're looking at right now.
I can throw in our preliminary discussions, which included a phone call to a lawyer, one of the lawyers, that are on the onset when we start creating and using some of this. We're going to attribute the story to as a newsroom, and with contributions by and editing by whoever what human may have done it. But in some cases, because we're never going to use anything out of the AI, we're always going to be touching it up and look at it, like hallucinations, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way
our
to
take
use
on
it. I think the perfect way to use AI right now and probably into the future is using it as something to give us a structure, be it code, be it images, be it anything, text generation. Use it as a structure and then go back into it and say, okay, I like this kind of flow of a paragraph, but obviously this date isn't right and I would rewrite it this way, so I'm going to rewrite it this way. And then you have a much more efficient workflow where you're still offering value to everybody, but you're also leveraging AI, which your competitors are most definitely leveraging to stay competitive, but also produce a good product. And I think that's really the perfect balance in 2023 and probably will be hopefully into the future, where it's kind of augmented content specific to text. It's augmented content where AI is helping, but you are the authority on it, and you're making sure it's right and making sure it offers value to the readers. I have a bunch of friends doing blogs who do just that. They create a bunch of content, make sure it sounds good, make sure it is accurate, rewrite a bunch of different things, and their readers love it. Their readers know it's created by augmented AI, and they are. I think one of their blogs is just hit 1 million a month after launching 6 months ago. So if you leverage it right, you can really kind of be powerful while still being ethical and helping people. So I think for content, at least, that's my view on how I think it should be used.
Can you show, I don't know, it may take a long time, but can you show us how to generate an image?
Yes, actually, I had that pulled up. I'm glad you mentioned that because this is a pretty cool platform. Okay, so I think really there are a few image generation tools out there, but by far the best image generation tool is called Midjourney. And Midjourney, I don't remember how you can get onto it. But midjourney.com is their website. You sign up somehow. It's done through Discord, which is its own platform, which is here. And in Discord, you go into the Midjourney channel and you say a prompt. I want something doing something. And you can create a bunch of images. And this is a public by default platform. So all of these images are created by other users of the platform. And you can see that they're creating all different types of things. You're seeing some product mockups, you're seeing some animations and illustrations, and you can essentially just create any language prompt. And I like Vaporwave as just a style. I find it very interesting. So I'll say wave Putor. This prompt will in real time show us the actual generation process of the image. And sometimes it takes long because it's running on limited hardware. But you can see here that it is creating its initial part of the image. And then from that, it kind of takes this initial blob of an image and makes it more of an image. And eventually we'll get to, I don't know if it will upload like this, but eventually we'll get to a very, very good looking image that does exactly what I want, a Vaporwave computer. And this process can be used for pretty much anything. You can create portraits, you can create mock-ups of computers like this, you can create a whole bunch of different things. And then you can also stylize it and you can say, I want it to be in the style of Vincent van Gogh, or I want it to be in the style of something else. And from that, you get images like this. And this is a pretty good image in my book. And this process is, I believe you can do this for free on Midjourney, with keeping in mind that everything is public and it's in these chats. I think it's a really cool piece of tech. And Midjourney is probably the best on the market just because so many people use it. And it's really, with anything AI, it's a data play. So the more data you have, the better you're off as the company. So OpenAI is going to win and Midjourney is going to win just because everybody uses them. So that's the process of creating an image. And this is not really my specialty, so I'm not really well versed in how best to prompt things. But from what I've done, if I say I want a photorealistic plumber, it will give me a pretty photorealistic plumber. If I want a Vaporwave computer, it'll do that. If I want a Vaporwave computer that is illustration style, it will do that. So I find this pretty fascinating, but I'm looking at it more as a consumer as opposed to a creator.
Is there a space where you can look at these very, like Vaporwave is a type of image? I'm just curious. I mean, is there a listing of various things with style example or something like that of various styles of image?
I don't know of a specific website. I know that these websites exist. They're called prompt libraries. There are a couple pretty popular ones. I know there's an open source collective called Learn Prompting, I believe, which teaches how to prompt, which is actually somewhat of an art and a skill, as a lot of people are learning as they kind of just play around with this. But there are definitely libraries out there where people post their most successful generations. I believe another one's called ShareGPT, which is a Chrome extension. So I think a Google search for that will give you great results. And with prompting, for me at least, it's really just trial and error. If I change this one word, how does that change the humongous mathematical equation that is the image and text generation process? If I do XYZ, how does that make something else different? So I think looking at prompts and looking at how other people structure them is a really cool thing to do. For me, everything is just as blunt as it can possibly be. And I find that with all of it, it makes it very, very simple and easy to understand what the prompt does, and then also what changes to the prompt will do as well. So creating a simple and blunt prompt, kind of as if you were talking to maybe a child and trying to get your point across to them, makes it just easy, and also easy to understand what the changes to your essential calculation will do with these prompts. So learnprompting.org, I know, is one. I believe ShareGPT is what the extension is called. And they have many, many users, and there are definitely websites out there. Something I wouldn't do that I have seen is buy prompts, people selling prompts, which I personally wouldn't do, but if you are so inclined, I know there are pretty big marketplaces already where people sell these prompts, which if you have the money to spend, there are definitely free services out there where you can do that too. I would also, I don't know if this exists, I know on GitHub there are really good resources called like Awesome XYZ. If you look up Awesome ChatGPT or Awesome AI prompts, I'm sure something on GitHub will pop up too. It's probably going to be a golden. So, don't know if it exists, but it's very helpful.
Cool, thanks.
I see a question. When this first came big on the scene a few months ago, everyone was stressing about AI, and it was only trained up to 2020. Is it still being trained? The answer is yes and no. So the OpenAI models, they cut off on 2021. If you're training your own model, you can train it up to the most recent information. If you train it with recent information, it will become more accurate. But again, it's more about providing the context that you know is accurate to it. You can only be 100% certain that it's right if you're giving it the facts and statistics to use. So creating a more up-to-date model will give you a more up-to-date output, but it doesn't necessarily mean 100% accuracy. So that's that answer. For us at CodeWP, going back to what we're up to, a big issue with these models is that they do cut off on 2021. So WordPress is now version 6. It used to be version 5. There are a lot of changes. It doesn't understand these changes in essence. So a big part of what we do is provide it this up-to-date information by not just training it into the model, but also just giving it the function that it requires and needs to use and telling it how to use it. So when it comes to knowledge dates and cutoffs and information training, the most popular models cut off on 2021, and even training them with up-to-date information won't necessarily determine a really good output. Yes, Midjourney does generate better images than DALL-E 2, likely because of the data that they have. The more data they have, the better they can train their models. The better they can train their models, the better the output. I think those are the main.
James, I got a question for you. When you talk about
Yes.
training, how do you go about, what does it mean by training? Are you inputting file or like a data files to it, or are you talking to it and just giving it saying this is a set of facts?
So there are a lot of different ways to do this, and it really falls on if you're using a model that exists, if you're creating your own model, but at the core of it, you're essentially giving it a input and an output. And these are how these models learn. They take an input and they learn what the output should be. And then from millions millions and millions of inputs and outputs, they eventually understand, oh, when this general concept is given to me, here's what my output should be mathematically. So when I go and train a WordPress specific model, the majority of what we're doing is creating as many code snippets as possible for as many different situations as possible with up-to-date code, and saying, here's what this snippet does, and then giving it the snippet. And then we do this over and over and over and over and over again. And from the thousands of snippets, it gets a good understanding of what it should be creating. And then we also augment that with context and knowledge that we know is right, that was verified by a human. And from this information given to it in the prompt and the training of it, it can create a very accurate piece of information. So to answer your question, the way we do it, we have a massive CSV, and we use Python, and we push it into the model if it's OpenAI. And if it is one of the custom models that we're working on, we have a machine learning engineer do it because it is very complicated.
Thank you.
And also, I think that the fine tuning is relatively complicated now, simply because it's pretty analog, where you're creating these data sets and uploading it and doing it through code. But I would be very surprised if in the next few months there aren't really beautiful looking tools that you can use to drag and drop a bunch of information into it to do what I just said in a easy to understand and use and clickable manner.
Oh, what fun is that? I'm a coder, so I.
Exactly. Half the fun is trying to figure out how it works.
Yeah.
Funny. We have about 15 minutes left. Mark, did you have another question? I just saw you unmute. So we have about 15 minutes left. We can certainly ask more questions about AI, but if you have other questions that are tangential or just WordPress related, we'll see what we can do for those too. So just kind of opening up the floor. Not to cut you off, James, if you have other things you want to add, by all means do.
I will stick around, and if I can help on any AI and also WordPress plugins, I will happily do so.
Excellent.
So I'm more of a no code, low code kind of webmaster. So whenever possible, I try to avoid any custom coding. And what I'm curious about is I'm constantly trying to figure out, as you talked about in your presentation, about getting an error. What's this error problem? So I try my best to try to figure it out. But say it's not that simple. Say I'm not just trying to learn what this particular error code means. Say I'm having some dysfunction because somebody tried to customize something for me, and they've tied together 2 or 3 different plugins together and added a couple of custom fields, but I don't know all the places that they've touched. Is there anything that AI could do to help me in that kind of scenario? Forensic.
Right now, it is not at all possible, because what it really boils down to is giving the AI. The AI has great logic and reasoning. It can code very well, but it's giving it the information that it needs to understand what your problem is. So as you just said, if you don't understand what has been done and can't provide it this information, it won't really understand, especially if it's a custom plugin. And this is where hallucinations do show up with these error logs. If you're pasting in an error log for a custom plugin, it's going to probably give you an answer, but it won't be a right answer because it just has no idea what the code in that plugin does. So this is a good question for me, because we're working on exactly that. We're building CodeWP into a platform that you'll have a helper plugin that you install on your website, and it looks at your plugins and says, oh, you're running this plugin and this plugin and this plugin. Oh, and this is a custom plugin. Let's take a look at this. And then on the front end, it's looking at a live stream of the website on the front end, and it's looking at your logs, and it's looking at your server and all of that. And from that, eventually, and this is years probably down the line, it will be able to grab all of this information and give it to the AI. And the AI will then have the information that it needs to say, okay, this error code points to this piece of code in this custom plugin, and this custom plugin on the front end outputs something that looks exactly like that. I know exactly what this does. And from that, here's exactly how to fix it. So that's what we're building at CodeWP. And I think that you'll probably see solutions like that niche down to these specific industries, really focused on giving the information to the AI, and then offering these custom AIs that are really focused towards a specific use case. So to answer your question, it's pretty impossible now. If you had an understanding of everything it touched, you could go to ChatGPT and paste in, okay, here's a piece of my code, and here's where it falls in my directory, and here's the error message, and all of this.
You
But
is out
it's
every place that you touched, because that's what you don't know.
exactly.
Forensically, it has been a bunch of coders and programmers touching everything that you want. So what came to mind when you were giving your presentation was you talked about line numbers. So if a standard, WP config has whatever number of lines, and a certain thing is supposed to appear on a given line, but now somebody comes in and customizes it, well, now all line numbers have changed. So perhaps you could at least say, this is a standard config file. Show me all the things that are non-conforming to a regular config, maybe.
That's literally is exactly what we're building, and it's going to take some time, I think, for us. But the reason we're building it is because the users of our platform, which there are tens of thousands at this point, are asking for that, and that's I think a perfect tool that's niched down to an industry that provides a solution using AI that really offers value. And it's not just, oh, I sit on top of OpenAI and I create code. At that point, it's a workflow tool for developers that helps people. So that's what we're building, but it will be a little bit before it actually exists. The question of is a term or that has become popular. So everybody kind of uses it now, but it wasn't like, I don't believe it was like a scientific term. But now they use it in the research papers and all that. So if you look up ChatGPT hallucinations, I believe there's probably a Wikipedia article that you can read more about that.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll call it a night, folks. Thank you so much, James, for participating today and sharing all your knowledge. This will get posted up on YouTube. If I don't get to it tonight, because I haven't had dinner yet, it'll be tomorrow. And so you'll be able to come back and check it out again. I'll post the link both in the meetup on meetup.com for this event, and then also in the WordPress, the Facebook group for the Rochester WordPress group. So if you're looking for it, it'll be there. Thank you again, James. Really appreciate it. And everybody else, we'll see you next month. I have Maestro Stevens coming to talk to us next month about some UX and design things. And he also is going to incorporate how he uses ChatGPT and AI for idea generation for actually building your website. So we're going to continue that theme next month, but more along the design theme and less about the content. So
awesome. I'm in that Facebook group, so if you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to answer, and I'll try to get those slides. I was just looking at them. They're like 50, they're huge. So I'll try to get them compressed and then put them on Facebook too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Have a great